All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to Webinar 2 in our Supercharge Your September board training series. Tonight we'll be talking about minding the gap, succession planning. Coming up in October, we have the UP Nonprofit Conference. So as you're learning about things tonight, be sure and make a mental note. We'll be doing some really fun case studies as part of the actual conference on Thursday. So you may use the knowledge that you learned tonight in those case studies. Besides the conference on Thursday, we have an exciting presentation on Wednesday evening as part of our opening session at the Ordock Brewing Company with Jim LaJoy from the Superior Health Foundation, and we'll be doing a reflection breakfast on Friday, October 19th to help you set goals around what you've learned at the conference on Thursday. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. You can visit our website, glcyd.org, for more information, including the agenda and registration. With that, I will pass it over to tonight's presenter, Amy Quinn, CEO here at Grow and Lead. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And we're talking about succession planning, and some of the time that can feel like such a boring subject. That's why I limited it to a half hour instead of a full hour. And as always, if you have questions or if you would like more information, at the end of the slides, you'll have my email address. Feel free to email me. And tomorrow, Victoria will be sending a link to the recording as well as a link to an evaluation form where we would like you to fill out. And that way you'll have her email address also, so you could ask either one of us some questions as a result of this webinar. So tonight we're going to define what a succession plan is and the importance of conducting succession planning and the types of succession plans, because usually people only think about the CEO or executive director when they think of succession planning, but tonight we're actually going to talk about 4 different types. And then we'll also give you some tips for conducting succession planning and trying to integrate it into your organization. So hopefully it doesn't feel so much like the S word, which is only second to the F word, fundraising. But succession planning if you think about the definition, this is from dictionary.com, succession is basically a sequence. It's a sequence, it's one thing following another. It could be people, it could be events following another. And then planning is designing or developing a process or an arrangement or a method, and it's developed in advance. And I would say the developed in advance is the real key to all that we're talking about here tonight. If you think of nothing else, think of do it in advance, because that's one thing that is so important. And succession planning it's about as popular of a topic as estate planning and writing a will. You know, everyone knows it is important. We say, yes, it's important, but most of us don't have them in place as far as wills or succession plans. Its importance is really, really undervalued, and people don't really want to talk about it or do it. And one reason is because people can get very insecure and uncomfortable and defensive and feel like their job is in jeopardy, when in reality, on the slide here, I say what it is it's looking to the future. It's being prepared. And as a board member, you have a legal duty of care for your organization. And so succession planning is actually a responsibility and a role of governance. And it helps you manage the risk of uncertain or unplanned transitions. And it helps your organization be more stable. But again, you say succession plan or you start talking about it, and it's a really difficult subject. So you want to make sure and communicate that it is not a process to oust any leaders or staff. It's not an indicator of job performance by any one individual. and it does not signal a lack of commitment. So many times people don't want to bring up the subject because either it can conjure up many negative assumptions or even past experiences, bad past experiences that people have had on, we're going to have a corporate restructuring or something like that. Succession plan is not the same. That's not the intent. And some of the time an executive director may say, or may be thinking, okay, I know that my organization needs to have succession planning. I'm not sure how to bring it up to the board because I don't want my board members to think that I have one foot out the door or that I don't have a commitment to this organization. And on the flip side, board members may not be too thrilled or too anxious to bring it up because they don't want their leader, their executive director, their CEO, to think that the board thinks they're doing a bad job, or that they're wanting to, give them a hint of it's time to go. So it can be really awkward. So the key is to communicate and really communicate what it is and what it isn't. And it really is being responsible, because you have, as board members, you are the guardians of this organization and that you're a board member for. And so you need to make sure that you have contingency plans in place. And so maybe that's another way to say it, is a contingency plan or contingency development or preparedness, whatever you may want to say it. But it can be very difficult to talk about. But like it or not, I love this quote by Jamie Neeson. Here's the reality. By choice or by chance, no one stays in a job forever. Just like with a will, eventually we all die. We all need a will or chaos ensues. So no one stays in a job forever. So you really do need to think about, it's actually irresponsible not to look at some type of succession planning. So think about your organization and some of the last few meetings you've had. And when was the last time you thought about what would the impact be on our organization if our CEO or executive director was suddenly incapacitated? Who's going to notify all the staff? What would we tell them? Who's going to speak to the community, to the press, to donors, to our clients, to funders, to other stakeholders? What do we say to them? Do all board and staff know who will be the acting executive until the board has a chance to meet and really process what has happened, because clearly there was an emergency? Or when was the last time you talked about who has access to the critical documents in your organization? Who has a copy of your IRS tax determination letter? Who has a copy of your filed approved articles of incorporation? Who has passwords to your financial systems and accounting and bookkeeping systems? Who has access and can use your donor database or any other systems that you may have that are critical to your organization? And along those lines, if you're an organization that has staff, are all the mission critical staff positions, would I have more than one person deep? If you think about like a sports team and how you have a bench and you look at how deep, coaches will look at how deep is my bench, how well developed are my players that are not my starting line. And so, have you thought about that? Have you looked at staffing plans? What board and volunteer skills are available to the organization? As a collective whole, you as a board, what do you bring in terms of resources as far as connections, your expertise, your experiences, your skills that could benefit the organization, and are they fully being utilized? And then what are the gaps on the flip side of that? Also, what aspects of our organization's culture do we want to preserve? Because if you think about it, no matter what, a change at the top, so a change in leadership always changes the culture of an organization to some degree. And as a board, if you aren't aligned in what your culture is, and if you don't have a strong culture, it would be easy for a leader to come in and really change it. It may not be the way that you like it, and it could happen without you really even, it could be a side effect, so to speak, of hiring the new director. So we'll talk more about being on the same page and thinking through things as we go forward tonight. Like I said, it's irresponsible not to do succession planning, not to at least have an emergency succession plan, which we'll talk about that. So you want to have the right attitude and think of it not as a dreaded, oh, we have to do more planning, but think of it as an opportunity for discussions, especially discussions you may not have even had before. The list of questions on the last 2 slides that I just gave you, you could bring those up periodically at different board meetings. If you are an organization that you have staff and you have several layers of staff or management teams, maybe you bring it up to your management teams on what is their staffing plan and how deep is their bench. You know, how solid is our organization when it comes to having potential disruptions or having turnover. It also really helps ensure the organizational stability and consistency, and it's important for those that you serve to know that you are a stable organization because they're counting on you for the services that you provide. Along with that, when you're doing your succession plan, by having planned transitions, it helps maintain organizational knowledge because not one person holds all the knowledge and nor is that knowledge all in a CEO or an executive director or a board chair or a founding member's head, but it's spread out across various people of the organization and among different information systems for the organization as well. So you are making sure that you truly are a public charity so that many people have the organizational knowledge to be able to continue the organization and that it's not just in the hands of one person or 1 or 2 people. And that reflects a commitment to the public that, no, we don't anticipate things happening. We're not in a crisis. We are actually just the opposite. We're such a strong organization that we're even working on plans for if emergencies were to happen. We have contingency plans because life happens. And so one of the things I talked about already is an emergency succession plan. And at a minimum, you really should have, your organization needs an emergency succession plan. And I'll go through that in a little more detail. And then the one you normally think of is the executive leadership. So like your CEO or your executive director, whatever your top decision maker is. It could be the board chair if you don't have paid staff. Also thinking along with your board chair, thinking a board of directors succession plan. So you as a board, are you actively looking at, are we developing our future officers? How deep is our bench when it comes to leadership development? Do we have the right people on the board? Do we have enough people on the board? Are we prepared for the future? And then we're going to dip our toe into staff related and management or executive director, CEO related items, but a board member should know about this, is operations manuals. Having documented processes in place, because again, no one is going to be in their job forever. So let's jump right into emergency succession plans. It is the responsibility of the board of directors. Ideally, you would do it in partnership with the CEO or executive director and be able to communicate the purpose. And here again, not cause ill will or insecurities to bubble up, but more like, hey, we just learned that this is part of our governance and we don't have a plan in place. We want to make sure we have a plan in place. And you want to do it as soon as possible and then review it annually. And So partner with the CEO. If the CEO doesn't want to partner, then communicate as much as you can, not only to the CEO or executive director, but also, if appropriate, to staff and volunteers, and just say, you may hear that the board's working on this. We don't anticipate any problems, but be assured that if something were to happen, we want to make sure we're prepared for it so that things can go as smoothly as possible during an emergency situation. There are a lot of templates available, and if you want to email me, I can send you a sample, one that I found that I really like. We here at Grow and Lead, we have a succession plan that we look at every year during our annual meeting. However, I found one that I actually like even better that I would use as a template because it also lists, it has room for you to think about all the things I had mentioned earlier about what technology do you use? Like, do you have QuickBooks for your accounting, or do you have a proprietary system? And what's the username and password for those? And who's your insurance company? And who's your health insurance provider? And do you have other benefits that important contacts to know about? And all these operational things that, for a smaller organization, it's great to at least collect that, periodically, so that you all have, or that someone has all of that information. And so if you think about it, an emergency succession plan, you're really just defining the sequence of actions and who completes each action. So you look at short-term and long-term. And if your executive director or CEO is incapacitated for short-term, these are the events that will happen and the whose role it is to do such things. If it's a longer term, then these are the things that will happen. Who's going to be the acting director? What would that director's salaries be? How's the organization going to manage suddenly having someone else be the acting director? What happens to their job that needs to get done that they had been in? Those types of things. Who does the acting director report to? Who would be the main contact person with the board? Who can they contact for help? All of this is listed. Who are the important people that need to be notified that something has happened, etc. Something that was just brought up by one of our board members is also consider adding a recovery plan. And that's something we hadn't thought of, so we will start working on that. But especially thinking about the floods that have happened up in the Copper Country, having a recovery plan seems a lot more important now than it has in the past, because in the past, it's been like, oh, well, what's going to happen here? We get a lot of snow, but that's no big deal. But what if you had a major flood, or your building burned, or something like that? Do you have backup plans in place? How would you continue to serve your customers? Those types of things. Little shout out at the conference, we are going to have a panel in using technology through turbulent times. So I'm looking forward to that, because we've had some agencies that have really done a nice job when accidents or tragedies have happened or natural disasters have happened, and they have continued their operations very well. And they've done a good job, and it's because they had plans in place. You want to, in your emergency succession plan, you want to review it every year, because things change quickly in an organization, and it doesn't help if you designate Bobby Smith as the acting director or the acting CEO when Bobby Smith's not with the organization anymore. You could also look at putting in the position title. The director, like for us, it says the director of operations will become the acting CEO. Another time, if you're an all-volunteer organization, you could also think about doing it. Every nonprofit has to complete a Michigan annual report if you're incorporated in the state of Michigan. So when you fill out that little postcard online, that could be your trigger of, oh, okay, let's look at our succession plan as well, in case there's an emergency. Keep in mind, this is not a public document because it can have some very private and information, such as a salary level for the interim director, or information about where your bank accounts are and who does your bookkeeping if you hire it out, those types of things. So you want to make sure you keep it in a secure location, and that a member of the board and your CEO and or vice chair or program director, someone else in the organization, has it in a locked file, so it's accessible, but it's not public. And then executive leadership. And this, I could spend a whole hour just on executive leadership, but I'm not going to. You're happy there. Again, it's the board of directors' responsibility. The board hires the executive. And again, you want to, if at all possible, you want to be able to partner with the CEO. And really, you want to start on it as soon as you complete your emergency succession plan. I'm in the process of building a house with my husband, and a friend came over to help, and he said, you know, the best time to build your next house is right after you finish this one, because it's all fresh in your mind and you know all the mistakes you made. It's like, oh, I don't even want to think about that. And that's kind of how an executive transition can be. It's like, oh, whew, we hired a new executive director. He or she's working out great. Wonderful. We can sit back and relax. But you know what? That doesn't do you or the organization any favors. It's like, nope, this is something to kind of keep on your radar. It should not be done in a panic by any means. But I like the idea of kind of creating it or reviewing it during your strategic planning. So roughly every 3 years, you look at, okay, what are the needs of the organization? What are the assets of the board as far as skills and leadership do we have versus what do we need? What do we have for an executive director skill set versus what do we need? And if something were to happen, or if based on this strategic plan that we're moving into, where do we want to go next, and what are the skill sets? And we can have the current executive director develop those skill sets so it can become part of, from your strategic plan, implementing into having it as part of job performance and job development for the executive director. And it can be a real smooth system that way, assuming that the executive director is willing to partner with you. And this is one area where you definitely want to be purposeful. You want to communicate the intent. You want to be very transparent. And with an emergency succession plan, you want to be transparent that you're conducting a plan, or you have a plan in place. You just don't want to be so transparent about what the plan actually says. The board votes on it and approves it, or sees that you have it every year, but otherwise it's kept locked away because of the confidential information. On the flip side, with executive leadership, the plan itself, the framework, how you want to go about it, that can be public, and you can set a very positive tone. You as the board, and those of you that are executive directors and CEOs on here, you set the tone for the rest of the organization, and that flows down to donors pick up on it, stakeholders pick up on it, your clients pick up on it. So think about it as an opportunity to discuss the future versus something dreaded that you have to do. That's also why I like incorporating it or thinking about it when you're doing a strategic plan. And you'll want to set aside funds for future implementation. So a succession plan is a plan that you hope you never have to put in place, but it's a plan that you have so that if anything happens, you're ready. Executive leadership succession plan, you know at some point you're going to have to use it, because again, no one stays in their job forever. So you know at some point you're going to implement it. It would be wise to start setting aside a little bit of money for future implementation, because if you do that, if you have some money set aside just for that, then you can have, maybe you have the new director shadow or co-lead with the current executive director for 6 months or a year or whatever, depending on your organization. But if you have funds, that gives you the freedom to have more options of creating a smoother transition. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. And then the board of directors. As I mentioned, you as a board also should have a succession plan. And we don't often talk about it as succession planning necessarily. We more think of it as recruitment, but also really think about not only just recruitment, but development. And if you think about every seat on your board is a very valuable contribution to the organization. You're the leader, you're setting the policies, you are the guardian and quote unquote owner of this organization. So as a board member, you're really important. And you need to make sure that you are getting the training you need and that you would feel comfortable stepping into an officer position if needed, or if you are an officer, that you're equipped to do what you need to do. And then also you need to make sure that other people are being recruited and developed along with you, because there's always going to be, there's always going to be turnover. And so thinking about what does it take to lead this organization, and are we preparing our board members to do that? And board, that's your job. Don't overly rely on staff. It's your job to develop your board and to train your members and to make sure that they are receiving the leadership development that they need to be able to do their job as board members. You want to incorporate, composition matrix when you're recruiting, and think of it as a tool to increase camaraderie, because you're also learning more about each other and the skill sets that you have and what you can bring to the table. And I put this question here: does the board need an emergency succession plan? Does your board need one? Think about that. If your chair was suddenly, or your president was suddenly incapacitated, do you have a vice chair or vice president that's ready to step in, ready and capable of stepping in? So that's something to think about. I'm not saying that board members need to create emergency succession plans. What I'm trying to say is that as a board, you need to make sure that you have your at least chair and vice chair positions that are pretty solid in place, so that you have leadership succession transition there in place if an emergency were to happen. And really, a great thing to tune into is next week. Chad's going to be doing a webinar all around board recruitment, and he gets into this talking about looking at your composition and how to recruit, and the purpose, the benefit of diversity on your board, and that type of thing, so that it can help you in your succession planning, or actually not even succession planning, in your succession implementing. So as I mentioned, we're going to take a quick sidestep into management instead of governance and cover operations succession plan. And this is something else that most people probably don't really think about. As a board member, you're not responsible for an operations manual, but you do want to make sure that the organization has one. So if a key staff member were to become incapacitated, then are their job descriptions and their duties and the things that they do and their passwords and whatnot, are those documented? I'm very grateful for our director of operations. She does a great job of documenting on the first payroll, these are the things she does, and here's the passwords and the website she goes to, and on the second payroll, these are the things she does, the last payroll of the month, yada, yada. So as a board, that's just, again, being prudent and being prepared. And remind people, again, you have to remind them, it's about the continuation of the organization. It's about being prepared. It's about having smooth transitions. It is not about the person. It's about the organization. And you want to remind them, you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. I love this. Don't reinvent the wheel, just realign it. And so back to governance. Here's a few board member checklists, because I know I'm getting short on time here. But one thing is, as I mentioned, your emergency succession plan needs to be written because when you're in an emergency, it's hard to remember what you had planned if you didn't have it written down. So make sure you have it written down and in a secure place. And as a board member, this is one area where you do want redundancies. You know, do you have more than one person on the bank signature card? I've heard of organizations that they can't get access to their own information because a key employee left and the records were never updated with this vendor, so they weren't able to access their information. They had to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to get their own organization's information. And those things, you know, it's easy to overlook those things. Thus, that's why it's good to have an inventory in your emergency succession plan. And if you're not referring to your strategic plan at every meeting to check on your progress, that's a whole nother webinar, but you also really want to look at it through the lens of making sure the board's aligned on future needs. You know, where are we going as an organization? What types of skill sets do we need? Do we have the expertise that we need? And how should we be developing our people? Our people meaning our leadership, our board, our volunteers, our staff, all of our people. And view board member training and development as part of the culture. So think about setting board goals, determine the training and leadership development. I know I'm hammering this pretty hard, but again, I kind of get on my little soapbox. This is the board's work. Don't rely on the staff. And then ensure that operations are documented and that key positions have backup, but you don't, as a board, it's not your responsibility to actually do that work. Usually that is the work of the executive director and the staff, but you want to make sure that things run smoothly. Here's a great example. In my performance review this year, my executive committee said, do you have plans in place for succession planning for the director of operations? Because she's my number 2 person in the organization and she has the most institutional knowledge. And so that is a great example of a board member exercising due diligence. And so I told them about how she has everything documented, and I think we are in good shape there. But that's an excellent example of governing and not micromanaging. And that's just a list of references I used if you want to take a look at those. Here is my email, and Victoria will be sending all this out tomorrow along with the link to the recording and a link to the evaluation form. And as we mentioned, if you want more, then come to the nonprofit conference. I would love to see you. Come, let me know that you're there and you heard this webinar and hopefully you liked it. And whether you liked it or whether you didn't, please fill out your evaluation. It's a really short, what Victoria, maybe 5-question survey, and it just really helps us know, are we on the right track? Are we giving you the information that you want, or how can we improve things and how can we better serve you? And with that, I'll put it back on the thank you slide. I apologize, we don't have time for questions and we ran a little late, but if you do have questions, there's my email. Also be looking for Victoria's email tomorrow, and happy planning. Thank you.